Good morning. Hi, everyone. I'm Rob Lefferts. Thank you for coming. I lead the product and engineering teams for our unified security operations platform. And it has been an amazing, busy, invigorating year. I'm excited to share what the team has been working on. Allie Mellen from Forrester is here with us to share her perspective on the industry's transformation and where she sees the most impact for the SOC. We also have Scott from the Microsoft Security Research and Brandon from Defender for 𝗬𝗲𝗏. And with that, let's jump right in. So last month, we released our digital defense report, and there's finally some good news to share on ransomware. Successful breaches are down by 300%, and I'm so happy to share positive indicators that for companies and organizations that are ready, they can make a difference. Unfortunately, the cloud continues to enable new scale, increasing the volume and velocity of attacks of all kinds. And we have seen a notable increase in the use of generative AI, particularly to target phishing emails, making them much harder to detect and much more effective on end users. Now, security leaders are all reporting increases in virtually every major kind of advanced persistent threat. And it all shows a common major theme. Attacks are increasingly targeted and multi-stage, which really demonstrates why we can't continue to rely on products of portfolios of fragmented security tools. There are simply too many vulnerabilities to manage, too many potential attack paths, and too many alerts. Analysts only have so much time in the day, and no security team has the resources to tackle this challenge manually. That's why last year we launched our unified security operations platform, which combines our global threat intelligence with all the capabilities of SIEM, XDR, cloud security, exposure management, and Gen AI into a single experience. It's the most comprehensive tool for the SOC in the industry. And it's not just an integrated set of capabilities for detection and response or a single agent that works across different endpoints and their operating systems. Our platform integrates capabilities across the entire life cycle of threats in virtually every domain, helping you prevent, detect, respond, and defend against threats, all at the speed of AI. Our customers are seeing tremendous value from this. With the simplification of the analyst experience, unified threat hunting, and embedded security copilot throughout being consistent highlights. Now let's hear from a Swedish insurance company, 𝗬𝗏𝗏, how they are benefiting from the new unified experience.
In the future, we will face threats that we can't even imagine today, but we will also have new tools to stop the bad guys from breaching us.
That's the fun part of working with IT security.
The insurance industry is relying more and more on technology to deliver its promise to the customers. Obviously, that's also happening to 𝗬𝗏𝗏. We insure almost half of Sweden's population, and they trust us to be there and protect them on the worst day of their life. That promise is what drives our security team. We saw that the threat landscape was changing quite dramatically, with ransomware being more and more prominent. We also saw that the current tool set that we had just wasn't enough. Then we started looking at, okay, so what's the next step for us? What could give us a complete visibility into our whole IT environment, and what could quickly contain and remove any types of threat that could occur? The Microsoft Defender and Sentinel suite gives the security team the ability to understand what's going on in the IT environment and quickly initiate any post-breach response.
I had one dream to be a police officer. So I think I work with IT security because I love when I can be the person who helps other people in the cyber world. Defender, it gives me the possibility to check if something mysterious happened to a user or if we have received some suspicious emails. I can get all that information in one view.
We use Defender to Sentinel to integrate everything from identity protection, endpoint management to email security.
the relationship between my team and Microsoft is good. We have always had a close collaboration, and I love it.
I would say that we are in a far better place when it comes to security. The day when something bad happens, we will have the tools available for us in order to stop the breach. We will be able to stop the adversaries when they come for us.
Thank you. It is gratifying to see, and that's why we do this work. We're thrilled with the impact security teams are reporting. We've made significant progress in the unification of detection and response, not only as Microsoft, but as an industry. But one area with significant opportunity is pre-breach. As the last 12 months have really shown us, keeping software up to date and installing strong security measures is not enough. No organization, not even Microsoft, will outpatch threat actors. We need to shift away from working through lists of vulnerabilities to thinking more like an attacker, viewing vulnerabilities not as a list, but as a connected chain where attackers breach the entire environment by winding through these vulnerabilities, reaching into your critical assets. As you heard yesterday from Charlie and Vasu, our unified exposure management tool is now generally available to all customers right within the Defender portal. This tool is built on the underlying graph that enables our entire security portfolio, integrating all the data and platform-level capabilities used across all our other tools. It delivers tremendous value right out of the box for security teams. And it's never been easier to continually discover, contextualize, and manage your organization's assets with attack surface management. Attack path modeling fundamentally changes how we address risk exposure, where we begin to treat attack paths similar to incidents with a prioritized list that we systematically address based on variables like what's the sensitivity of the data, what's the importance of these critical assets, and what is the severity of the exposure. Exposure management insights are also extremely insightful during investigations, especially during in-progress attacks. If you're investigating a new incident and you're shown that one of the compromised entities could lead to a critical asset or sensitive data, that important context could be the difference between a routine remediation and a board-level briefing. This is just the start of rethinking how we break down the silos between posture, detection, and response. We're imagining a future where these insights get more and more integrated across the platform and enable new AI-based capabilities to discover some system immunity that will be incredibly transformative. Okay, while having an environment with virtually zero exposure would help all of us sleep better at night, it's simply not reality. We need to be prepared for attackers to continuously try to breach our defenses. In addition to a strong prevention, it requires advanced detection models that always stay up to date and adapt to attackers as they evolve. With that, I want to invite Microsoft security researcher 𝗦𝗲𝗏𝗏 to the stage to discuss how we're combining our global threat intel with AI to scale attack disruption capabilities. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Rob. All right, quickly bear with me while I provide some context on how we're going to do this next. Virtually every attacker has a toolkit full of interconnected and purpose-driven components they use to conduct operations. Typically things like command and control servers, domain names, phishing email kits, and more. Traditionally, security researchers would have to manually identify these and add them to detection models. As you can imagine, threat actors are constantly updating their toolkits to be fresh and hard to detect. This results in a cat and mouse game where attackers can add new infrastructure where there's a period of time where this infrastructure is very effective and the detection models were updated. This is a perfect challenge for AI. I'm excited to share a new capability that combines the power of Microsoft Threat Intel and Microsoft Defender XDR to automatically detect new infrastructure and block it before it's used in widespread campaigns. Let's walk through a real-world example. In this scenario, a well-resourced threat actor launches a ransomware campaign that targets unmanaged devices to gain initial access. This could be through a phishing email, malware payload, or password spray attack. In this case, they're using new infrastructure, so the attacker's first couple steps are undetected, and they're able to begin moving laterally across the unmanaged device. Fortunately, tools like XDR can use their depth of signal across identity, app, and managed endpoints, email, and more, and advanced analytics to accurately detect this malicious activity. And with automatic attack disruption with Microsoft Defender XDR, the attacker is blocked after the first couple of steps, and their progress ultimately stopped. Now, with our new infrastructure profiling capability, the system automatically identifies this new infrastructure on its first use, and it's added to the Titan database. This means we can now begin automatically taking preventive containment and remediation actions on all future attacks. This dramatically reduces the overall effectiveness of new threat actor infrastructure in a matter of seconds and minutes, not days and weeks. But we're not stopping there. We're taking this even further with an adaptive TI graph that can detect malicious infrastructure before it's used in its first attack. This graph utilizes guilt by association techniques to uncover additional attacker infrastructure, even when it hasn't been used in an attack yet. By using machine learning to analyze the complex relationships between millions of entities, alerts, and incidents, we can effectively unmask infrastructure by identifying all the known malicious infrastructure around it. This enables the disruption capabilities built into Defender to automatically prevent new infrastructure from being used successfully in attacks. This is a strong step towards building system immunity that dynamically reacts to the threat landscape. Our Titan-powered disruption has been working silently behind the scenes for a couple months and went fully live this week. If you'd like to learn more, you can check out the link to the paper we just published at Titan Disruption. Okay, back to you, Rob.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you. So Titan has already delivered impact. It's been increasing our disruption rate by 21% and decreasing the time to disrupt almost in half. This new disruption scenario joins our growing list of supported attack types, offering in-progress defense across a wide variety of different scenarios. Next, I'm thrilled to introduce Principal Forrester Analyst, Allie Mellen. I've had the opportunity to meet with Allie on numerous occasions, and I always learn a ton. And so with that, thank you for joining us, Allie.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great to see you.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. All right, so unfortunately, the security analytics platform market is a bit of a dumpster fire right now. And I'm sure all of you are well aware of this, and this is also how you can tell that I do not work for Microsoft, is because I can't imagine them having a slide like this. But the reality is that there's a lot happening in what we call the security analytics platform market, or also known as the SIEM market, and it's really challenging for practitioners. Because at the end of the day, we're seeing a lot of mergers happening, we're seeing a lot of acquisitions happening. The market landscape looks completely different than it did just 2 years ago. And this puts practitioners in a very difficult spot. Now, there's a couple of factors that come into play here more than anything else. When it comes to security operations and the work that we do in the SIEM, there is way too much data. We know this. Getting it all into one place is very challenging, if not impossible, for some teams in some scenarios. And to be honest, in some cases, we take in data that we don't need because it's easier, because another team wants it. There's a lot of factors that come into play here, but it increases the cost. The second challenge is that there are too many tools, to be quite honest. There's way too many tools in security operations. And beyond there being too many tools, it also creates a difficult mindset. Because what we are trained on and what we are known for and what we look for in job descriptions is not our skill as security practitioners, it is our skill at administering a tool. And that's because of the fact that we have so many tools and we need to be up to date on how to use all of them. And to be honest, in a lot of cases, the analyst experience is not great in some of these tools. So it takes a lot of work to get up to speed. And then the third challenge that we're seeing is that there are too few insights. This is driven by a couple of different factors. The first that I like to talk about is we have too much data, right? We got a lot of data coming in, which sounds great. We've been told that the more data, the better. But the problem is data without actionability is meaningless. And that's the missing link in this puzzle, which leads to things like detection engineering and the importance of detection engineering and knowing what you're going to do and knowing what use case you're applying the data that you're bringing in for. There's a couple of other problems when it comes to the broader security analytics platform market that are making this especially difficult. The first thing is a lot of M&A. And that is concerning a lot of loyal practitioners who, to be honest, many of whom really like their SIM, which is hard to believe. I'm surprised that I'm saying it. I remember the first time that I went into a SIM, which will remain nameless, and I almost quit the industry right there, because I was like, this is not for me. This is not going to work. But you get used to it. You build your skill in it. You're known for your skill in it. And now there's the potential that it won't last. That's very stressful. The second piece here is that traditional ingest-based pricing has always been a thorn in the side of practitioners, and it's continuing to frustrate customers. And the reality is we're stuck with it. What we've seen is that no other model really works, right? There are a lot of startups out there that will try to do, okay, you can do employee-based or ingest everything, but that only lasts so long as they have the investor money to support it, and they burn through it real quick when they take that approach. So there's a challenge here too, where we need to understand what data we need to bring in, and we need to be strategic about it so we can make the best possible decision and reduce the cost. The third factor here is that there's a lot happening in the data world that's actually very exciting, but it's a little bit out of scope for security, so it's difficult to keep track of everything that's going on. Alternative data stores are one approach, so data lakes, data warehouses. But the challenge here is, if you want to use a data warehouse, great, but they don't have any security expertise. Their way of getting security expertise is partnering with some of these smaller providers. And so you go from one unified tool to managing 6 different tools to do the same thing, and 6 different tools that aren't nearly as solidified in the space as that one tool. We also see that things like federated search on the data front are challenging this model, this idea of keeping the data where it resides and accessing it when you need it. Sounds great, except for the fact that when you're in the middle of an incident, it isn't the most performant. So you're going to have a lot of lag pulling from those queries. And until we fix that problem, it's not really a perfect solution. And then the last thing, sorry, I know there's a lot going on in this market, I'm telling you, this is the dumpster fire, is that XDR vendors are providing an alternative for better detection and workflow quality. And we've seen this take place over the past 4 or so years with a lot of different vendors. We're going to talk a little bit about how that approach to the market is changing things. So there are a couple of different approaches that are battling it out for the center of the SOC, which has always been the SIM. But now with XDR, we're seeing a little bit of a change. So we know the classic security analytics platform SIM, right? Take in data you want, build whatever rules you want, build whatever playbooks you want, good to go. It's been the center of the SOC for a while because of the customization you can do. But there is one big problem, which is that to do that customization, to build rules, to build playbooks, requires people. And not only does it require people, it requires skilled people. And that is one of the things that we do not have a lot of in this industry. And so it's caused a big issue because you end up, first off, bringing in a bunch of data. But again, that visibility does not mean actionability. You then have to create that actionability. You tend to have like one person on your team who's really, really good at creating new detection rules that are going to be high efficacy. But then 6 months later, they take off. And you're left with a bunch of rules that 5 years later, no one's touched. So it creates a big problem. And in many ways, EDR stepped in to try to address some of this, right? What the EDR market showed was that you can get a lot of very high quality data off of the endpoint for detection and response. And what it showed further is that given that most of the EDR providers were SaaS offerings, they could build detections for you on the back end and make it a little bit easier so that you had higher quality detections than what you could necessarily get out of the box in SIM. But there's 2 problems with the EDR market. First, while endpoint data is great, it is not enough. So you end up bringing those alerts back into the SIEM anyway to do correlation with additional data sources. Second problem, data was on the endpoint, but it's not anymore. It's in the cloud. And so that means that EDR itself is getting less valuable than it was before, and that it needed to change or die. And so that's where we ended up with XDR. XDR was able to not only have that EDR component, but also bring in additional data sources, typically the ones that were in the vendor's own portfolio, first and foremost, into the picture, right? And that's great, but the problem was that even in that scenario, you're still missing some of this third-party data. You have XDR with some of your data, you have your SIEM with some of your data. And so the XDR vendors are like, okay, I guess we're gonna be building a SIEM. And the SIEM vendors are like, okay, I guess we're gonna figure out if we're gonna acquire an XDR provider or what we're gonna do there. Some of them still haven't made it to this path. But what we see is that the XDR providers, the ones that originated in EDR, now provide a SIEM replacement or log management tool, right? It isn't fully featured the way that we expect from a security analytics platform. At least right now, you're not gonna see user behavior analytics in there. You're not gonna see a very robust SOAR capability. But it has some of the features you need just to bring in some extra data from third parties and manage it there. And it's now doing it in a unified analyst experience. So you don't have to be bouncing between these two tools. You still get the high quality detections on the XDR front. You still get the custom stuff you want to do on the SIEM replacement side. It's kind of the 80-20 rule. Ideally, XDR is going to be doing 80% of your detections, and then you can do the manual stuff in the SIEM for the 20%. The other approach is, of course, the security analytics platform approach. Much fewer vendors have this approach in the market today because it's difficult to maintain a portfolio that is this big. And to be honest, the security analytics platform is a lot of different components coming together. It's difficult to do this in a comprehensive way. But for those that do, you've got the fully fledged security analytics platform with all of the capabilities that come with that, and you have the XDR, and that is on a unified analyst experience. What has to be done now is how do we reduce some of the costs associated with that, and how do we manage some of the costs so we can lower it, especially on the security analytics platform side. So that's where the market is today. But there's one other element that we definitely need to talk about, which is generative AI, and how security tools are leveraging generative AI. There's obviously been a lot of talk about this. I will say I am a generative AI skeptic, but I think it's going to have value. We just haven't seen the full extent yet. And so that's one of the things we're going to talk about. And I love to start this conversation by talking about what I call the blob. So you may be familiar with the Blob movie. This is not about that at all. I know, I'm sorry. What this is about is a term that Ben Rhodes, who was President Obama's former Deputy National Security Advisor, a term that he coined in 2016 to talk about the foreign policy establishment in Washington, especially the entrenched foreign policy establishment. He called it the blob because they had their own system of groupthink. And we're not actually going to talk about foreign policy here, thank God. But what we are going to talk about is the blob that we have in security. In security, we have a disjointed approach. We have the practitioners doing the work, and then we have people, in many cases, who are selling the products, to investors, who are selling the products to the street, who have never done the job of security. And we run into an issue where ultimately we have expectations over what that technology can do because of the messages that they're delivering to the market that aren't actually going to result in better outcomes for security professionals. And you may think, Allie, stop beating up on them. They're doing their best. And that is absolutely true, and it's not true for everyone, right? There are some people that are doing a great job. They're not falling into the blob mentality. They're learning about security. They're doing everything that they can. But the reason that it's important to highlight it is because at the end of the day, we do not have a lot of time as security practitioners. And the things that we are thinking about and arguing over are things that will never be a reality. And so that's the approach that I take when we talk about generative AI or any technology. Let's get down to the reality of what it's going to provide you today, tomorrow, in the future, and break out of the magic. And so with that in mind, we often see this picture of what the autonomous SOC can be. This thing that is going to make sure that we never have to work in the SOC again, right? Looks pretty cool, a little bit scary. The reality is the autonomous SOC looks something much more like this, which is very cute. And I would definitely prefer to have this robot, to be honest, but it's not very scary for the attackers. And there's a reason for this. So prior to Forrester, I was a hacker, and prior to being a hacker, I was a computer engineer. I wrote a lot of code, wrote a lot of software. One of the things that I'm sure for anyone in this audience who's written software before knows is that at the end of the day, software is written with constraints. There has to be some level of what is coming into the system, what is coming out of the system, right? Even for the record, with AI agents, because I have written an AI agent before. And that's not to sound impressive. It was literally for this little game called 𝗦𝗲𝗶𝗸𝗍𝗫. For any of you who are into machine learning, you know this game. And it was just to avoid this like stink monster. But regardless, it was an AI agent, and I stand by it. Now, what does this mean? That we have technology that requires constraints. When you think about what hackers and any cyber attackers love to do, what do they love to do? They love to get around constraints. They love to find ways around rules. And so this is why the autonomous SOC reality looks way more like this than the previous slide, is because they want something where they know the constraints, where they know the inputs and the outputs, and they can dodge it. We see this with EDR technology when they dodge the endpoint agent. They find a way around the technology as it exists. And that's why security operations is so cool, right? Is because we are humans fighting other humans. The reality is attackers want to face this. They do not want to face you because you are just as motivated as they are. You are just as creative and as intelligent, if not more. And so we need to prioritize the human in this conversation. But that doesn't mean that generative AI isn't useful, right? There's a couple of core use cases for generative AI and security, and I break them down into content creation, behavior prediction, and knowledge articulation. And I do this because if you think about what generative AI truly is, it's a way to model what's going to come next in a very complex sequence. That is the simplest definition that I can give for what it is. That's why it's so good with human language, right? It's because we're always coming up with new words and new ways to describe things that are kind of ridiculous. I mean, look at anything that Gen Z is doing right now. So it's really great at that. And you can apply that to language. You can apply it to anything that has a pattern or language to it. Content creation is what we all know, creating code, creating text, creating graphics. Behavior prediction, that is something that we're not seeing as much of, but it is going to happen, and it's going to be really interesting when it does. It is about taking any type of language, if you think of attacker behavior as a language or user behavior as a language, and predicting what's going to come next. Now, we're not seeing it a lot today because at the end of the day, machine learning is really good at this, and it's not necessarily valuable for the resources that you have to switch over to generative AI for this, but it's going to come, and it's going to be really fascinating when it does. And then lastly, the knowledge articulation or chatbot use case, looking at things, communicating things in a very human-friendly way. So to close this out, we're going to go over 4 misconceptions about generative AI that are perpetuated by the blob. We're going to start with this first one, that AI is going to take your job. We've talked about this a little bit, but the reality is AI is not going to take your job, but someone who works better with AI will, especially in security. What you should be worried about is how effectively you can use generative AI in the tools that it's in today, how it can improve your efficiency, because the people that do that are going to be so much more effective than everyone else. The second misconception is that generative AI is going to benefit entry-level personnel the most. I love this one because I hear all the time how great it's going to be for entry-level practitioners. But the problem with that is, I have, unfortunately, seen a lot of demos of these technologies. And I can tell you that the response recommendations it gives in an incident are not business contextualized. They don't necessarily always make sense. In one case, I saw it say, block Excel across the enterprise to prevent this from happening again. Not a great idea, right? But I will say that the interesting thing about this is that if you think about someone who's just coming out of school, they're coming from a very academic approach. I know I've mentored a lot of these people. they might think, maybe you don't want to block Excel across the enterprise, but couldn't hurt to block macros across the enterprise, right? That could be really helpful for the business. The reality is that where generative AI stands today, it doesn't have the business context or the knowledge or the tribal knowledge often about your processes to give a good recommendation as to what to do next. And so instead of focusing on the entry-level personnel, we recommend focusing on how the experienced and senior personnel can use it, because they're the ones that know what to do, and they just want something that's going to help them figure out what needs to happen and take that action fast. The third misconception is that generative AI is going to give you visibility into your entire environment. And I love this one, because at the end of the day, a lot of the demos that we've seen show this kind of conversation. Someone asking a chatbot, what vulnerabilities exist in my environment? You want to get back an answer that's comprehensive of your entire environment, right? But the problem is, security tools don't work well together. And so it doesn't have that visibility. But since you're asking a chatbot, it feels very real. It feels very organic. So it might give you an answer that only shows half of your estate. It might give you this answer instead. I can only see a third of your assets, buy another integration, and I'll tell you more. That's the best case scenario, right? Because at least then you don't get the wrong answer. But the reality is that generative AI doesn't solve the fundamental problems of security yet. First, data consolidation is hard. If you wanted to do this with generative AI, you need to put all the data in one place so that it can train on it continuously. Can't do that for a couple of reasons. First off, getting the data in one place is difficult. Second, even if you get the data in one place, training it continuously with generative AI is going to be real expensive. The second problem, say you wanted to take a different approach to this and say, okay, we won't train it on all the data, but we'll use generative AI as the face for all of the API connections to all of these tools. Sounds great, except for the fact that getting security tools to work together well is near impossible. Anybody who has had to work with any security technology knows this. And so we can't yet solve this problem. Now, generative AI has the potential to maybe solve the API integration problem, but even that is rife with challenges. So don't necessarily trust the output just because it's coming from this chatbot. And then the last one is that chatbots are the best use case for generative AI. So one of my colleagues has this saying, consumers want convenience, not conversations. I like to adapt this saying to SOC analysts want convenience, not conversation. Coming back to before, we don't have a lot of time. We got no time. And we don't have time to sit there and come up with questions that we want to ask a chatbot. Instead, we need to think about it through analyst experience, which is a term that me and one of my colleagues coined a couple of years ago to talk about security analyst experience with the tools, technologies, and processes that they work with. It's ultimately a way of breaking down the analyst workflow and looking for ways to improve it. So say you'd take the discover section here. That could be going through the queue and figuring out which alert you need to address. Explore could apply to the triage process and figuring out what is actually happening here. Classify can come back to the investigation, determining what you want to do, and then making the decision in determine about what response steps you want to take before executing those actions. And this applies not just to the detection and response lifecycle, it could apply to detection engineering, it can apply to everything. But it's about breaking down the processes that we have into smaller groups and then applying generative AI to where it makes sense to improve them. Now, I'm going to pass it back to Rob. Thank you all so much. Rob?
Thank you, Allie.
Thank you.
That was great. Thank you so much. Thank you. That insight is tremendous, and it really hits on something that we're seeing as well. Gen AI is having a significant impact on the industry, and that includes cyber attackers. Let's zoom in on where we're seeing a lot of this in particular, which is in email. And unfortunately, attacks are most effective when they blend in with everyday normal interactions, allowing them to go unnoticed. We have seen a lot of activity, in particular using Gen AI to create luring mails for business email compromise. Turns out that every new technology we build to make life better also makes life better for attackers. So lures used to be poorly written with easily identifiable indicators like spelling mistakes, and now they can be very polished. Attackers have pivoted to using Gen AI to tailor those messages to their targets, resulting in emails that vary slightly and look very authentic. And this is a new era of social engineering where the attackers are smarter and the attacks come faster and are harder to detect. So to combat this evolution, we've developed a new threat classification technology that uses large language models to automatically detect these new types of emails through intent analysis. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Brandon Koeller, to walk us through a real attack and show us how this new capability will help prevent it. Thank you, Brandon.
Thank you. All right. Boop, hit the next thing here. Okay, so let's level set on how this technology actually works. And we'll show you what this looks like to an analyst in our demo here in just a few seconds. Imagine a world where attackers are using Gen AI and automated platforms to create differentiated payloads and attack campaigns at scale to target millions of victims. Those emails flow through Microsoft Defender for Office 365 and make their way through dozens of filtering technologies and AI-backed evaluations. Today, we're pleased to announce that we've added yet another powerful layer to that stack, AI-powered intent analysis for BEC detections. This filtering capability catches Gen AI attacks that try to socially engineer victims with just text payloads. This intent analysis can determine with very high accuracy, above 99%, and very low false positive rates, whether the content of a message is trying to manipulate the victim into thinking they've already interacted with the attacker, whether the message is trying to perpetrate payroll fraud or impersonate someone known to the victim, amongst other capabilities. More importantly, this intent analysis reduces a threat classification for the message that can be used by SOC analysts to figure out who is being targeted in their organization, how they're being targeted, and to figure out how best to protect that user from subsequent attacks from other vectors. All right, so what does this look like in reality? Moving to the Defender portal, let's zoom into an incident where a BEC attack was actually stopped with a combination of the LLM-backed BEC detections and automatic attack disruption in Defender XDR. In this particular incident, we can see that our user Jonathan has been targeted with multiple phishing attempts. You can see 2 BEC emails that the attacker attempted to send to his email, but both were blocked from being delivered. The first being the payroll action required email, and the second being the Contoso payday details needed one. So if we click into the payroll action required email, hopefully that's going to click in here in a second. It's actually going. Doopity doop. We can see. Hold on one second. Let me just make sure that it's actually working. Now it is, okay. There we go. You can see the first being the payroll action required email and the second being the Contoso payday details needed one. If we click into the payroll action required email, there we go, we can see the new threat classification payroll fraud now shows up in the details pane. This classification will be a useful piece of metadata for the SOC analyst to use later, and please note that many other classification labels will be possible in the future. Okay, so let's close this particular pane. If we click into the Contoso payday details email, we can see that this email was blocked from ever being sent to the user because we were able to detect it with high confidence in runtime, that this was a phish, and we use our LLM-based detections to further classify the email as a payroll fraud attempt. Number 2, so 2 different attempts, same user, using very, very different payloads, but the same classification. I wonder how this will be useful. So let's actually open the email entity page so we can gather more details on this email. Here you can see details like this email was a phish, it was classified as payroll fraud, and a bunch of other metadata. If we actually click into the email preview, we're able to see the actual email that was sent to lure the user with the initial phish. And when you look at this email, there are a few callouts we want to make that tell us that this is a phishing attempt. Payroll service provider, we will not be able to process your pay. That sounds pretty threatening. This is a new payroll company. That's suspicious. And please confirm the details necessary in a timely manner. That's a sense of urgency. These are all social engineering tactics that can be enhanced by Gen AI, which allows attackers to create unique malicious engineering content for each targeted victim. This complicates detection and campaign identification. However, The new LLM back detections catch these emails with above 99% confidence, and they enable the SOC to expand the scope of their advanced hunting workflow beyond just emails or beyond just URLs and attachments. So let's see how the analysts can use this data as part of their advanced hunting queries to better understand the intent of phishing emails that have been sent to employees. So first, we navigate to our advanced hunting interfaces. This is shared across all of MTP, I should note. Then we can construct a KQL query. We can even ask a Security Copilot to do that. Note the little gentle robot that uses these new threat classification categories so we can easily visualize how much this organization has been attacked in this particular way. I think a bigger bar means more, I think. Not only can your SOC analysts understand who has been targeted by these types of attacks, but they can use the analysis to do a bunch of things that mitigates the risk. They can bolster their security posture, they can create a custom detection rule to alert and take action, or train their users to spot attacks like this on their own. Customers can also author custom detection rules that use this threat classification. In this case, the SOC analyst is going to create a rule that will alert when a BEC detection is inboxed because of a safe sender list entry, but the threat classification still indicates that it's likely a payroll fraud. And that's it. End-to-end intent analysis, protecting users from Gen AI, BEC attacks, and all the tools that your SOC needs to further mitigate that risk. That's it. Thanks, and back to you, Rob.
Thank you, Brandon. All right, the new LLM-based BEC detections are generally available to all Defender for Office 365 customers, and the threat classifications will be coming widely available next month. These three announcements really demonstrate the value of a unified platform, enabled by a graph that contains all the security-related assets and their relationships. Unifying data across the entire digital estate enriches pre- and post-breach automation with critical context and AI-driven insights, helping prevent attacks, predict where attackers go next, and automatically stop them in their tracks. These join a host of other announcements across our platform. We don't have time to discuss all of them, but there's a few I just want to highlight quickly. Copilot now summarizes relevant user activity during an investigation, providing critical context without having to jump across portals or sift through an attack timeline. Analysts will now also see a summary of a user's insider risk activity or see related activities for quick context during the investigation. And now response actions for Defender for Cloud can be initiated right inside of the unified investigation experience. I know it's disappointing. Every year you have to keep listening to me talk about scary things happening in our industry. And it's unfortunate, this is the reality given the profitability of cybercrime. However, now more than ever, I'm energized about the future. We're entering a new era where security teams are empowered to proactively address risk and have an incredibly powerful set of tools at their disposal to defend their organizations. In an industry where there is plenty of competition, we're happy that you choose to partner with us and help us build a safer future. We look forward to hearing from you, and please share your feedback. And be sure to check out the other related sessions to learn more about some of the specific announcements or components that we discussed in this one. Please also don't forget to try out the trial for Defender XDR today, and we want to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much to Allie. Thank you for joining us and sharing your insights, and thank you to all of you for attending in person and online. Thanks very much, everybody.